Start decorating the exterior before reinforcing the foundation. The same applies to your mind. You cannot expect to contribute deeply to others if your own internal architecture is unstable. You cannot ask your brain to perform under high demands if it is overstimulated, distracted, and deprived of recovery. You must turn inward. That's not weakness. That's training. Imagine for a moment that your tension is a beam of light. Wherever you direct it, things come into focus. But the more you scatter that light, the dimmer everything becomes. That's what happens when you chase too many inputs, when you feel the need to explain yourself constantly, to prove your worth, to seek permission. That beam gets so diluted, you forget what you were trying to illuminate in the first place. Focusing on yourself is not passive, it's active, and it's uncomfortable. Because when you really start listening to your own thoughts, your own emotions, you will hear things you've been avoiding. You will confront disappointment, doubt, shame, fear. But you will also uncover clarity, purpose, intuition, and strength. That's what happens when you stop speaking and start observing. That's what silence offers. It doesn't remove the noise, it reveals its source. One of the most overlooked advantages of silence is its effect on time perception. When you are constantly distracted, time feels like it's slipping through your fingers. But when you are quiet, when you are inwardly focused, time stretches. You begin to notice the texture of your thoughts, the patterns of your behavior, the tempo of your breath. And this is critical because mastery, whether in athletics, art, science, or relationships, is rooted in the micro-awareness of your internal state. Without silence, you lose that resolution. There's another reason to remain silent, and it's strategic. Unpredictability is power. In evolutionary terms, the animal that broadcasts its position is vulnerable. In psychological terms, the person who reveals too much becomes predictable. Predictability can breed complacency in others and insecurity in oneself. When you speak less, you observe more. You listen more, and you collect more data about people, about situations, about the dynamics around you. This doesn't mean manipulation, it means intelligence. It's important to recognize the biology of focus. The neurotransmitters dopamine and norepinephrine regulate attention and motivation, but they are finite. Every decision you make, every task you attempt consumes a bit of that currency. So when you are not focused on yourself, when you are scattered, you're depleting your neurochemical reserves for things that may not even serve you. And silence is a recovery protocol. It allows those systems to replenish. Let's talk about growth for a moment. Real growth is not loud. Real transformation doesn't usually come with applause or affirmation. It happens when you're sitting alone, wrestling with your contradictions, identifying your limiting beliefs, and changing your operating system. No one sees it. And that's exactly why it's powerful. Because it's real. And because it's earned. Now, the resistance you'll feel when you begin to focus inward and silence your environment, that resistance is the doorway. Most people avoid it. They reach for noise to escape discomfort. But if you sit with it long enough, you'll find something extraordinary. The beginning of agency, of authorship, of sovereignty over your own mind. This is not to say that external input is inherently bad, but it should be filtered, not followed. The moment your inner compass is guided entirely by the opinions, judgments, or expectations of others, you lose autonomy. You become a reaction machine. And the antidote to that is silence. Deliberate, strategic silence. In neurobiological terms, when you focus on yourself and limit verbal expression, you increase activity in the brain's default mode network. That's the network involved in self-referential thinking, memory consolidation, and future planning. In other words, by staying silent, you activate the system responsible for understanding who you are and where you're going. This is why some of the greatest minds in history practiced solitude. They weren't antisocial. They were constructing frameworks that required uninterrupted cognition. And you don't need to be a philosopher to apply this. You simply need to claim space for yourself, for thinking, reflecting, resetting. There will always be a pressure to explain yourself, especially in a world that rewards visibility. But the strongest people I've encountered, scientists, athletes, leaders, they speak less and do more. They don't announce every move. They make the move and then let the results speak. Because silence is not absence of power, it's a reservoir of it. And here's the beautiful irony. The more you focus on yourself, the more you end up offering to others, not through advice or commentary, but through presence. When you are centered, others feel it. When you have done the internal work, people recognize it, not because you told them, but because it's embedded in how you carry yourself. Your nervous system communicates beyond words. If it's regulated, you become a stabilizing force for others. If it's chaotic, you become reactive. Silence, then, is not retreat. It's recalibration. It's how you align your nervous system so that when you do choose to speak, to act, to move, it comes from clarity. So when people ask me what the first step is to finding direction, to achieving clarity, to becoming more disciplined, I don't tell them to make a plan. I tell them to stop talking, stop announcing, stop narrating your process, and start experiencing it. Because when you stop speaking, you start noticing. When you focus on yourself, you discover your edges. You uncover what's true. And you create the conditions for something far more powerful than noise, self-mastery. Mastery is not a destination. It is a state of constant recalibration. Each day, the self you meet in silence is slightly different. Your chemistry changes, your hormones fluctuate, your emotions evolve. And if you're not tuned in, even slightly, to that shifting inner terrain, you miss the opportunity to adjust in real time. That's what silence and inward focus offer, real-time alignment. Now, let's talk about behavior. Every action you take wires your brain. This isn't poetic, it's literal. Through a process known as Hebbian plasticity, neurons that fire together wire together. Your choices, repeated consistently, forge your identity. But if those actions are dictated by external pressures or societal scripting, then the self you are wiring is not truly you. It's a mimic, a copy. And that's how people become successful by the world's standards, yet feel hollow, because their identity was constructed from noise. But when you step into silence, when you listen to the internal friction between what you're doing and what you believe, you start to feel where the misalignment lives. That discomfort is data. That internal resistance is not something to numb. It's a signal to pause and look inward. Most people don't do that. They distract, they externalize, they talk, but those who do sit in the stillness long enough to decode their discomfort, those are the ones who evolve. To evolve, you must make space for integration. Every book you read, every insight you gather, every failure you survive, none of it means anything if it isn't metabolized into your nervous system. That process doesn't happen in conversation. It happens in quiet reflection. Silence is the crucible for insight. Let's go further into neuroscience. When you engage in silence and solitude, you increase activation in the insular cortex, a region deeply involved in self-awareness and emotional regulation. You begin to separate emotion from reaction, thought from impulse. And in doing so, you reclaim a kind of agency that most people don't know exists. It's subtle, but it's powerful. It's the ability to notice a reaction rising, and instead of acting on it, you simply observe it. That skill alone can transform relationships, careers, and lives. Now, there's a cultural addiction to performance, to explaining who you are, to making sure people understand your intentions, your worth, your identity. And there's a deep fear that if you don't speak up, you'll be misunderstood or left behind. But let me tell you something grounded in both observation and neuroscience. True power is often misunderstood, not because it hides, but because it refuses to explain itself. That's not arrogance, that's sovereignty. When you are inwardly focused and outwardly silent, you start to become unshakable. Your sense of value is not contingent on being seen or validated. It's self-generated. And that kind of self-sufficiency radiates a quiet magnetism. You won't need to announce your progress. People will feel it. You won't have to explain your boundaries. They'll be respected because your energy makes them known. Every great transformation starts internally, and every great internal shift is preceded by a period of silence. Think about the most pivotal decisions in your life, the moments that changed your trajectory. Were they made in a group chat? Or were they born in the quiet hours when you were alone, when you finally got honest with yourself? Honesty thrives in silence, because when you stop talking, you can no longer lie to yourself. The stories you've been rehearsing fall apart, the masks drop, and underneath all the narratives is something primal, the truth of who you are and what you're here to do. That truth is not loud, it's subtle. You won't find it in conversation, you'll find it in observation. Focus is a form of love. And when you focus on yourself, you're not rejecting the world. You're telling yourself that you are worth the attention, that your inner landscape matters, that your thoughts, your dreams, your questions deserve space. And that space is sacred. Not everything is meant to be shared. Some things are meant to be held, protected, and nurtured in silence. There is a concept in cognitive science called deep work, the ability to focus without distraction on a cognitively demanding task. It's in that state that we do our most meaningful thinking and creating. But deep work isn't just for knowledge workers, it's for life. Deep living means you don't skim the surface of your own experience. You don't perform your life for others. You inhabit it fully. And to do that, you must cultivate both silence and focus like a practice. Silence isn't about cutting off communication. It's about increasing signal-to-noise ratio. In neuroscience, signal to noise is how we describe the brain's ability to detect relevant information in a sea of stimuli. High signal to noise means clarity. Low signal to noise means confusion. Silence improves that ratio. It sharpens perception. It cleans the lens through which you see yourself and the world. You'll notice something else too. The more silent you become, the more sensitive you get, not emotionally, but perceptually. You'll sense people's intentions more clearly. You'll detect incongruities in your environment. Your pattern recognition will increase. And this is not mystical, it's neuroplastic. When you reduce external input, your brain reallocates resources toward noticing subtleties. That's survival. That's intelligence. If you've ever felt like you are losing touch with yourself, the path back is not through speaking more. It's through removing what doesn't belong. That includes over-explaining, over-consuming, over-compensating. Because the self you are trying to find isn't lost. It's buried under noise. Silence is how you excavate it. Every day you have a choice. You can leak your energy outward, trying to be understood, to be accepted, to be impressive. Or you can consolidate that energy inward, trying to understand yourself, accept yourself, and impress upon your nervous system that your own presence is enough. You may feel resistance to this path. That's normal. We are wired for social approval. But when that wiring goes unchecked, it becomes a prison. Silence is how you find the door. In the animal kingdom, the most dangerous creatures don't roar. They don't need to. They move with economy, with precision. They don't perform, they act. You don't need to announce your hunger to be a predator. You don't need to prove your worth to have value. Focus on yourself. Be silent. Let your movement speak. Even in relationships, silence is powerful. You begin to realize how much of communication is not about words. It's about attention. It's about regulation. It's about energy. And when you're centered, when you've done the work of focusing inward, you enter relationships not from a place of need, but of overflow. You stop extracting. You start contributing. There's a term in neuroscience, homeostasis. It's the body's tendency toward internal balance. Silence is emotional homeostasis. When you're silent, you're not avoiding conflict. You're preventing dysregulation. You're staying grounded. That's not avoidance. That's control. And you know what happens when you start living like this? Your intuition gets louder. Not because it wasn't there before, but because the static is gone. The whispers that guide your life, the gut feelings, the quiet knowing. They're always there. You just haven't heard them because you've been too loud, too distracted, too externally focused. You do not need to convince the world of anything. Your results will do that. Your presence will do that. Your consistency will do that. And all of it begins when you stop bleeding energy through unnecessary expression. The most valuable commodity you have is attention. And the first person who deserves it is you. Focus on yourself. Not forever, but long enough to remember who you are when no one is watching. Long enough to build something worth showing the world. And when you do show it, do so with quiet confidence. Not with explanation, not with justification, but with embodiment. Because silence isn't empty, it's full of answers. But you won't hear them until you stop talking. There's something that happens when you've been silent long enough. Your internal narrative slows down. The voice in your head, the one constantly evaluating, comparing, judging, it begins to quiet. It doesn't disappear entirely, but it loses its urgency. And in that slowing, you begin to discern between thoughts that are yours and thoughts that have been implanted, beliefs inherited, not chosen, goals pursued, not aligned. The clutter of collective thinking falls away, and you stand for perhaps the first time in a long time as yourself. What arises next is clarity, not a flash of genius, not a sudden life plan, but a subtle, grounded knowing, a sense that you are exactly where you need to be, even if it's not where you want to stay, that you are not behind, that your value isn't determined by speed, volume, or visibility, that real growth often looks like nothing from the outside, and that's okay. We live in a world obsessed with broadcasting. The instinct to post, to tell, to make others aware of what you're doing, where you're going, who you are, it's become default behavior. But the moment you feel compelled to explain your path to those who do not walk it, you've already stepped off it. Silence is what keeps you on it. Silence reminds you you are not here to be seen. You are here to see clearly. You'll find, too, that the more silent you become, the more sensitive you are to your own thresholds. You'll feel when you're being pulled out of alignment. You'll sense when a conversation is costing you more than it's worth. You'll know when a goal is rooted in truth or in trauma. This level of discernment cannot be achieved through talking. It is forged in observation, in pause, in presence. And presence, that elusive, powerful state, is only available when you are not rehearsing what to say next, when you are not living in imagined arguments or fantasy futures. Silence trains presence. It's not absence of thought, it's mastery over which thoughts get your attention. There's a neurochemical aspect to this. When you are constantly speaking or engaging outwardly, you are producing elevated levels of dopamine and norepinephrine. That might feel good in the short term, but over time, it leads to fatigue, burnout, and diminished creativity. When you practice silence, you allow your brain to enter more regulated states. You reestablish baseline dopamine sensitivity. You recover, you regain motivation, not from stimulation, but from alignment. Alignment is another key outcome of inward focus. When your actions, thoughts, values, and goals begin to line up, something incredible happens. Friction decreases. Not friction with the world, that never goes away, but internal friction. The kind that burns energy, the kind that creates anxiety. When you are aligned, even difficulty feels manageable, and the path forward, though still unclear at times, feels less threatening. This is why the internal work is never wasted, even when it doesn't yield immediate results, even when no one sees it, because it's not about outcomes, it's about orientation. And you can only orient yourself when you are still long enough to feel where you actually are. In a world where everything is moving fast, your nervous system begins to equate speed with safety. You start to think that if you're not doing more, saying more, producing more, you're falling behind. But that's a trick of the system. Your biology wasn't built for this pace, and silence, when practiced regularly, becomes a way to reset your tempo, to live at a human pace, not an algorithmic one. And here's the deeper truth. Silence is a mirror. It reflects back to you everything you've been unwilling to see. Your patterns, your excuses, your untapped potential. It's where you meet the parts of yourself that don't need validation, the parts that just are. And once you spent enough time in that space, the external world loses some of its grip. It doesn't disappear, but it no longer dictates your identity. There's no shortcut here. This path is not glamorous. There's no applause for being quiet. No algorithm rewards it. But over time, your silence builds a gravity, a presence. People feel it when you walk into a room. They don't know why, but they feel it. Because presence is not volume, it's coherence. And coherence comes from doing the inner work silently and consistently. So when the world asks you to perform, pause. When it asks you to explain, wait. When it asks you to prove, stay silent, not out of fear, not out of arrogance, but out of deep knowing that your energy is not free, that your presence is not casual, that your words carry weight only when rooted in stillness. And when you do speak, let it be with precision. Let your words be few but dense. Let your expression come not from reaction, but from integration, from a place of real understanding. Because that is the kind of communication that changes people, not noise, not repetition, but depth. Depth that was carved in silence. There's an ancient intelligence in silence. Before there was language, there was awareness. Before there was noise, there was rhythm, breath,